3 horror stories about the Hotel Cecil. Based on real stories. Not all terror comes from fiction. Story 1. The Girl in the Water Tank. My night at the Cecil Hotel. Have you ever felt that some places seem to breathe in the darkness? That their walls hold whispers from a past too terrible to name? I never believed in such things, until I spent a night at the Cecil Hotel, investigating the case that would forever change my understanding of reality. The mysterious passing of Elisa Lam. The Cecil Hotel stands like a dark monolith in downtown Los Angeles, its brick facade weathered by nearly a century of tragedy. Built in 1927 as a luxury establishment, it was meant to be a jewel of the city. But as the economic downturn tightened its grip, the once prestigious hotel descended into something else entirely. By the time I arrived in February 2014, the Cecil had already earned its sinister reputation. Individuals with dark histories had once slept in its rooms. Numerous losses of life had occurred within its walls. The surrounding Skid Row area had become a haven for misfortune and desperation. But I wasn't there because of the hotel's dark past. I was there because of what happened to a 21-year-old Canadian student named Elisa Lam just 1 year earlier. A case that had captivated the internet and haunted my thoughts since I first saw that elevator video. As a journalist specializing in unexplained events, I'd covered many disturbing stories, but something about Elisa's case felt different, more personal somehow, as if her story was somehow connected to mine in ways I couldn't yet understand. The front desk clerk barely looked up when I checked in. "Room 514, he muttered, sliding a key across the counter. "Elevators to your right." The elevator, just like the one Elisa Lam had been captured in on that surveillance footage that went viral. I hesitated before stepping inside, remembering how she had behaved, pressing multiple buttons, peering cautiously into the hallway, making strange gestures with her hands as if communicating with someone, or something invisible. When I reached my floor, the hallway stretched before me like a throat swallowing me whole. The carpet pattern, once elegant, was now faded into ghostly shapes that seemed to shift under the flickering fluorescent lights. My room was small and spartan. The wallpaper peeled at the corners like withering skin. The bathroom sink dripped intermittently, a sound that would become the heartbeat of my restless night. As night fell, I laid out my research materials. Police reports indicated Elisa had checked in on January 31st, 2013. She was supposed to check out on February 1st, but vanished without a trace. Then on February 13th, after guests complained about the water, its strange taste, its unusual color, maintenance workers made a troubling discovery. Elisa's form was found in one of the water tanks on the hotel's roof. I opened my laptop and played the elevator video again. The timestamp read 2:00 a.m., February 1st, 2013. The last known sighting of Elisa Lam alive. Watching her erratic movements sent chills down my spine. The way she hid in the corner, the bizarre hand gestures, the apparent conversation with empty space. Was she experiencing an episode related to her diagnosed bipolar condition as authorities suggested? Or was she trying to escape something or someone? I couldn't sleep. The dripping faucet had become maddening. At 2:00 a.m., the exact time of Elisa's elevator incident, I decided to retrace her steps. The hallways were deserted, illuminated only by emergency lighting that cast long shadows. I took the elevator down to the lobby. then located the stairway leading to the roof. The door was alarmed and locked, just as reports had stated it was when authorities investigated Elisa's disappearance. This was the first major contradiction. How had she accessed the roof? How had she managed to climb into a water tank with a heavy lid? The examination had ruled her passing as accidental drowning, with no signs of physical trauma or prohibited substances in her system. Just her prescribed medications, some at sub-therapeutic levels. As I stood before the locked door, a hotel employee rounded the corner. I quickly pretended to be lost. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice echoing in the stairwell. "Just my way back to my room," I stammered. He studied me for a moment. "You're here about the girl, aren't you, Elisa Lam?" My silence was confirmation enough. "I was working the night she disappeared," he said quietly. "I didn't see anything unusual, but what? The water pressure was off that whole week. Maintenance checked the tanks repeatedly but found nothing wrong. Until they found her." I swallowed hard. "The elevator video. That elevator had been malfunctioning for months," he interrupted. "Stopping on wrong floors, doors not closing properly. But after she disappeared, it worked perfectly fine until they found her body. Then it started acting up again." He leaned closer. "Some of the older staff say this place, it hungers. It chooses people sometimes. People who are vulnerable. People who won't be missed right away." "What do you mean, it hungers?" His eyes darted nervously down the corridor. "There are places in this world that aren't right. Places where the boundary between here and somewhere else gets thin. The Cecil is one of those places." I thought about Elisa's behavior in the elevator. Those strange hand gestures, the way she seemed to be hiding from something unseen. "Do you think something was following her?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "Room 506. The woman who stays there reports hearing footsteps in her room at night. Room 738 has shadows that move against the light. And your room, 514. He trailed off. "What about my room?" I demanded. "It was vacant for weeks before and after Elisa disappeared. The sink runs black water sometimes." Back in my room, I couldn't shake the employee's words. I tried to focus on the facts. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was traveling alone. The toxicology report showed she had been taking her medication, though not consistently. The investigation concluded her passing was a tragic accident, but something still didn't add up. I opened my laptop again and noticed my room's Wi-Fi had disconnected. The available networks list showed something strange. Elisa L. My heart pounded as I clicked to connect. No password required. My browser opened automatically to a news article about a health crisis on Skid Row in 2013, just weeks after Elisa's passing. The test used to identify the strain was called Lam Elisa. Was this just a coincidence, or something more troubling? The bathroom faucet suddenly stopped dripping. Complete silence filled the room, heavy and oppressive. Then, my sink turned on by itself, water gushing forth with unexpected force. The water ran black for a moment before clearing. I approached. Slowly, my reflection in the mirror above the sink distorted, and wrong somehow. Behind me, I thought I saw a figure, dark and feminine. But when I spun around, the room was empty. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check the elevator." Against all better judgment, I left my room and headed for the elevator. When it arrived, it was empty. I stepped inside and the doors closed automatically. Then without, Pressing any buttons, it began to move, stopping at seemingly random floors, opening its doors to empty hallways before finally taking me to the lobby. When the doors opened, I gasped. The lobby was completely transformed, not the worn, faded space I'd checked into, but gleaming with 1920s opulence. And standing at the front desk, her back to me, was a young woman in a red coat, Elisa Lam. Tried to call out, but my voice failed me. The elevator doors began to close, and I thrust my hand out to stop them. When they reopened, the lobby had returned to its modern, dilapidated state. Empty. I rode back up to my floor in a daze. As the elevator ascended, the lights flickered, and for just a moment I thought I saw a reflection in the metal doors. Not my own, but Elisa's. Her eyes met mine in the reflection, and her lips moved as if trying to tell me something. Then the doors opened to my floor and the illusion vanished. When I returned to my room, something had changed. The research materials I'd left neatly arranged on the desk were now scattered across the floor. In the center, arranged in a perfect circle, were all the photos I had of Elisa Lam. And on the mirror, written in what appeared to be condensation, roof. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I packed my belongings and checked out of the Cecil Hotel. The morning desk clerk gave me a strange look as I handed over my key. "Everything okay with your stay, sir?" "The room," I said. 514. "Has anyone else reported issues with it?" "Issues?" she repeated, her professional demeanor slipping just slightly. The water running black, electronics malfunctioning, seeing things that shouldn't be there. She glanced around to ensure no one else was in earshot. "Every room in this hotel has stories, sir. But after what happened with that poor girl, there've been more reports than usual." "What do you think happened to her?" I asked. She shook her head. "The official explanation makes no sense. How did she get to the roof? Through alarmed doors? How did she get into that tank? How did the lid close behind her? You don't think it was an accident? I think this hotel has a way of influencing vulnerable people, making them see things, do things." I thought of the message on my mirror. Like going to the roof? She didn't answer, but her eyes told me, "Enough." As I left the Cecil Hotel, I looked back at its weathered facade. In broad daylight, it seemed almost ordinary. Just another aging building in downtown Los Angeles. But I knew better now. I knew what lurked behind those walls, in the spaces between reality and somewhere else. I never published my investigation into Elisa Lam's case. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, not because the truth is elusive, but because it's too disturbing to acknowledge. What happened to Elisa Lam? The official explanation, an accidental drowning during a mental health episode, fails to answer all the questions. How did she access the roof? How did she get into the water tank? Why did the water pressure fluctuate before her body was discovered? Perhaps some places do exist at the intersection of tragedy and the supernatural. Perhaps the Cecil Hotel, with its long history of despair, has become a vortex for darkness, a place where the veil between our world and something else grows thin. I don't know if Elisa Lam was suffering from mental illness alone, or if something at the Cecil Hotel found her in a vulnerable moment. What I do know is this. When I returned home, I discovered strange bruises on my ankles, like fingerprints, as if something had tried to drag me down while I slept. And sometimes late at night, I still hear the sound of dripping water, even when all my faucets are tightly closed. Sometimes I find puddles of water on my bathroom floor, and occasionally when I check my phone, I find text messages from unknown numbers. Messages that disappear when I try to show them to anyone else. The last one I received, just last week, read simply, "I never meant to go to the roof." If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure to subscribe for more real accounts from those who've faced the impossible and survived. What do you think really happened to Elisa Lam? Was it truly just a tragic accident, or something more sinister? Share your theories in the comments below. And remember, some places carry darkness within their walls. The Cecil Hotel might just be one of them. Story 2. Faceless Shadows. What I saw in room 738. They say when you stare long enough into the darkness, sometimes the darkness stares back. I used to laugh at that idea. Now I keep every light on in my apartment. I haven't slept with the lights off since my stay at the Cecil Hotel, since I saw what lurks in the shadows when the world goes quiet. The Cecil Hotel wasn't my first choice of accommodation in Los Angeles. In fact, it wasn't even my 10th. But when a last-minute business trip coincided with a major convention in the city, I found myself with limited options. Just one night, I told myself as I scrolled through the reviews, how bad could it be? I knew about the hotel's reputation, of course. Built in 1927 as a luxury destination, the Cecil had fallen into infamy over the decades. The economic decline transformed the surrounding area into Skid Row, and the once grand hotel became a refuge for society's overlooked. Multiple unfortunate incidents, unsolved mysteries, and even the temporary residence of notorious figures with dark histories had earned the Cecil its troubling reputation. But I'm a rational person. I don't believe in spirits or supernatural forces. I believed in what I could see, touch, and explain. The Cecil was just an old building with a troubled past, nothing more. At least that's what I told myself as I checked in on that October evening in 2015. The lobby retained traces of its former elegance beneath years of neglect. High ceilings with ornate moldings now dulled by time, marble floors worn by countless footsteps, brass fixtures tarnished to a muted patina. The air felt heavy, as if the building itself were exhaling memories better left forgotten. Room 738, the desk clerk said, sliding a key across the counter. His expression was unreadable, though I thought I detected a flicker of something in his eyes when I took the key. Sympathy? Concern? Is everything all right with the room? I asked. Of course, he replied too quickly. Just, some guests find the old building makes strange noises at night. Nothing to worry about. He hesitated, then added, We've been renovating floors 9 through 12. 7 is one of our older floors. The elevator ride was unnerving. Not because anything happened, but because of what didn't happen. The ancient mechanism was completely silent except for the occasional metallic groan, as if it were carrying a weight far greater than my solitary presence. The small space felt increasingly confined as I ascended, the air growing noticeably colder with each floor. When the doors finally opened on the 7th floor, I was greeted by a corridor that seemed to stretch beyond its physical dimensions. The carpet, a faded pattern of interlocking geometric shapes, appeared to shift slightly under the flickering fluorescent lights. The walls, covered in yellowing wallpaper, seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting imperceptibly with the building's settlement. Room 738 was near the end of the hallway. Standard hotel room. Queen bed, desk, bathroom, window overlooking the city. Nothing extraordinary, though the air felt unusually cold and stale, like a room that had been sealed for too long. The furniture was outdated but functional. The bed spread a muted floral pattern that might have been fashionable decades ago. I set down my bag and pulled back the heavy curtains. The lights of Los Angeles sparkled below, normal life continuing. Beyond these walls, I felt a momentary reassurance seeing the city alive and vibrant, so far removed from the oppressive atmosphere of the hotel. That night, I worked on my laptop until around midnight, responding to emails and preparing for my meeting the following day. The room had grown increasingly cold, despite my adjusting the ancient heating unit beneath the window. I pulled the extra blanket from the closet, noticing as I did that the closet seemed unusually deep, its back wall lost in shadow despite the room's lighting. As I prepared for bed, I switched off the main light, leaving only the small bedside lamp illuminating the room with a weak yellowish glow that barely reached the corners. As I lay in bed scrolling through emails on my phone, I became aware of a strange sensation, a pressure in the air, as if the atmosphere had suddenly thickened. The room seemed darker than it should have been, the lamp's light not reaching the corners as it had moments before. I glanced toward the far corner of the room and froze. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the furniture. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized this shadow had dimension, depth. It was darker than the darkness around it, a void in the shape of a person. It stood, perfectly still in the corner, tall, humanoid, but wrong somehow. Its proportions were slightly elongated, its head featureless, not just lacking distinct features, completely smooth, as if someone had erased its face entirely. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Stress hallucination, sleep paralysis beginning while I was still conscious. A bizarre optical illusion created by the interplay of shadows from the streetlights outside. Then it moved. Not toward me, but a subtle shift of its formless head as if it had suddenly become aware of my attention. The movement broke my paralysis. I lunged for the light switch and flooded the room with harsh fluorescent light. The corner was empty. I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart pounding against my ribs. The rational part of my mind insisted I had imagined it. A combination of exhaustion, the hotel's unsettling ambiance, and my knowledge of its troubling history creating a momentary hallucination. But I couldn't shake the certainty of what I'd seen, or the lingering sensation that even now with the lights on I was being observed. I didn't sleep that night. I kept every light on, my back against the headboard, eyes fixed on that corner. Nothing appeared, but the air remained heavy, like something just beyond perception was waiting patiently. At one point, around 3 a.m., I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath fogged in front of me, and the lights dimmed momentarily before brightening again. In that instant of diminished light, I thought I glimpsed movement in the corner of my eye. Not in the corner where I'd seen the figure, but in the bathroom doorway. I didn't investigate. I couldn't bring myself to approach the bathroom. Instead, I turned on the television for additional light and sound, keeping the volume low. The local news provided a comforting background of normal, everyday concerns. Traffic, reports, weather forecasts, upcoming events. A tether to the rational world outside room 738. When morning finally came, I checked out immediately. At the front desk, a different clerk processed my departure. An older woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile. "Everything satisfactory with your stay?" she asked mechanically. "The room," I said, my voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "Has anyone else reported?" Issues with room 738? Her professionalism slipped for just a moment, enough for me to catch. A flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "I think you do," I insisted. "The shadow, the figure in the corner." She glanced around to ensure no other guests were within earshot. "Look, every old hotel has its stories. The Cecil more than most. In 2015 alone, we've had 3 guests request room changes after spending time in 738. One guest posted about it online, described seeing a tall, faceless shadow that seemed to watch him. "Why do you keep booking people into that room?" I demanded. "Management doesn't acknowledge these incidents," she said quietly, "and we need every room generating revenue." She hesitated, then added in a near whisper, "Room 738 wasn't always 738. The hotel underwent renovations in the 1960s. It was originally room 762. Does that matter? Maybe. Records from the 1940s mention a guest in 762 who was found, well, in a concerning state. He'd scratched all the mirrors in the room until they were opaque, covered every reflective surface. When they found him, he was huddled in the corner, repeating the same phrase over and over. "What phrase?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "It has no face. It takes your face." When I returned home, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I began researching the Cecil Hotel's history obsessively, focusing on room 738, formerly room 762. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. The incident the clerk mentioned was just the beginning. Room 762 had been the site of a mysterious occurrence in 1947. A businessman named Harold Mortensen had checked in for 3 nights. On the second night, guests in neighboring rooms reported hearing him having an agitated conversation, despite hotel staff confirming he was alone. The following morning, a housekeeper found him sitting motionless in the corner of the room. According to the reports, he was physically unharmed but in a state of catatonia. He never recovered, remaining in that state until his passing years later in a care facility. But what made my blood run cold was the housekeeper's statement to police. His face looked wrong somehow, like someone had tried to erase his features. After the Mortensen incident, room 762 was vacant for months. Then in 1952, another guest reported waking to find a shadow person standing in the corner of the room. She described it as having no face, just smooth darkness where features should. The room was renovated and renumbered as part of the hotel's attempt to distance itself from these incidents. It became room 738, but the reports continued. Throughout the decades, guests reported similar experiences. A tall, faceless figure observed in the corner of the room, typically in the early morning hours. Several mentioned feeling a presence, watching them, even when nothing was visible. Others described waking to find their breath fogging the air, the room inexplicably cold. The real revelation came when I connected with a former maintenance worker who had been employed at the Cecil during the 1980s. He agreed to meet at a coffee shop after I explained what I'd experienced. "That corner," he said, his weathered hands trembling slightly around his cup. "It's always colder than the rest of the room, no matter what we did with the heating system." "Did you ever see anything?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he told me about the night in 1984 when he was called to fix a leaking pipe in 738. As he worked near that same corner, he felt what he described as cold fingers gripping his ankle. When I looked down, there was nothing there. But later I found bruises, perfect fingerprints around my ankle. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did anyone else ever report seeing the figure? Not just seeing it, he said, lowering his voice. There was a guest in 87, found unresponsive in the bed, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Medical examiner called it a cardiac event, but he trailed off. But what? The housekeeper who found him said there was ice-cold breath coming from his mouth. In August in Los Angeles, he leaned closer, and his face, it looked like something had been pressing against it, trying to erase his features. That night back in my apartment with every light blazing, I felt a familiar pressure in the air. In the corner of my bedroom, the darkness seemed to deepen, and for just a moment, I thought I felt a cold breath against my face. It's been years since my night at the Cecil Hotel. I've moved 3 times since then, each apartment brighter than the last. I sleep with lights on, back against the wall, never allowing my bed to face a corner. Most nights, I can convince myself it was just a stress-induced hallucination. My mind playing tricks after hearing too many stories about the Cecil's dark history. But sometimes, when I'm alone and the hour grows late, I feel that familiar pressure in the air, a heaviness that doesn't belong. And I wonder if whatever dwelled in room 738 followed me home. Last month I woke at 3:17 a.m., the exact time I had seen the figure at the Cecil. The room was unusually cold, my breath visible in the air despite the summer heat. As I reached to turn on the bedside lamp, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror across the room. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, my reflection had no face. The Cecil Hotel stands as a monument to human suffering. Decades of tragedy concentrated in one location. Some places absorb the darkness they witness. They become thin spots in the world where something else can peek through, or something from inside can attach itself to you. Science can't explain what I saw that night, but those who've experienced similar encounters at the Cecil understand. The faceless entities that lurk in corners, watching, waiting. Perhaps they're manifestations of the hotel's collective trauma. Perhaps they're something older, predators, that were drawn to the Cecil precisely because of its history of pain and vulnerability. I still don't know what it wanted from me, but I feel its absence like a promise that someday, when I least expect it, when my vigilance finally falters, I'll turn to find it standing in the corner once more. And this time it might not stay there. Last week I received a package. No return address, no note inside, just a hotel key on a worn brass tag. Room 738. If this experience sent shivers down your spine, make sure to subscribe for more true encounters with the unexplainable. Have you ever felt that sensation of being watched in an empty room? Or glimpsed something in your peripheral vision that vanished when you turned to look? Share your experiences in the comments below. And maybe tonight check the corners of your room before you turn off the lights, just to be sure you're really alone. Story 3. Whispers from room 1419. The voice that told me to jump. Have you ever heard a voice so compelling, so persuasive, that you'd follow its commands without question? Even if it asked you to open a window on the 14th floor and step out into nothing but air? I have. And the only reason I'm alive. To tell this story is because something else in that room wanted me to suffer more than it wanted me to die. The fog of memory parts reluctantly when I try to recall the details of that night at the Cecil Hotel. Not because the experience has faded with time, but because my mind instinctively recoils from it, like fingers jerking away from an open flame. The Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles doesn't look particularly menacing from the outside. A brick building from 1927, it stands like a tired sentinel over a neighborhood that lost its luster decades ago. But those who know its history understand. The Cecil isn't just a hotel. It's a repository of tragedy. I didn't know any of this when I booked my stay in 2018. I was just a struggling writer looking for the cheapest room in LA while attending a literary conference. The irony doesn't escape me now, that a writer seeking inspiration would find himself ensnared in a narrative too terrifying to fictionalize. When the taxi dropped me off, I noticed the building had been rebranded as Stay on Main, though locals still called it by its original name, the Cecil. The transition between identities seemed fitting for a place that existed in two worlds. The mundane reality of budget accommodation, and the darker realm of urban legend. The lobby was a strange mix of modern touches and faded grandeur. The attempts at renovation couldn't quite mask the building's age, like cosmetics applied to withering skin. The air felt dense, almost reluctant to enter my lungs, carrying the faint scent of industrial cleaner and something older beneath it. Stale memories, perhaps. The front desk clerk barely looked up as he processed my check-in, his movements mechanical, rehearsed. Only when he reached for my room key did I notice a slight hesitation in his hands. "Room 1419, he said, sliding a keycard across the counter. 14th floor? I asked. Isn't that unlucky in some cultures? He finally met my eyes. Something flickered there, a warning quickly suppressed. We don't have a 13th floor. 14th is actually the 13th. He hesitated, then added, Would you prefer a different room? Something in his tone made me pause. Is there a problem with 1419? No problem, he said quickly, too quickly. Just, some guests find it a bit uncomfortable. I should have asked for a different room right then, but I didn't believe in superstitions or hauntings. I was tired and all I wanted was a place to sleep. I'll be fine, I assured him. His expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something, relief, when I took the key card. Enjoy your stay, he said, though his voice carried no conviction. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than it should have. The ancient machinery groaned as it ascended, the metal box occasionally shuddering as if passing through pockets of resistance. I noticed the button for the 13th floor had been replaced with a blank space, a small void in the sequence of numbers. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. The carpet was worn in the center, like a path carved by countless worried footsteps. The wallpaper, once white with a subtle floral pattern, had yellowed with age, the flowers now resembling something else entirely in the dim lighting. Faces, perhaps, or hands reaching outward. Room 1419 was near the end of the hallway. Nothing distinguished it from the neighboring doors, yet as I approached, I felt an inexplicable reluctance to insert my key card. The air around the door seemed different, cooler, perhaps, or more still, as if the atmosphere itself were holding its breath. Inside, the room was unremarkable. A double bed, a desk, a bathroom, and a window overlooking the city. Nothing unusual, except perhaps how ordinary it all seemed given the clerk's strange behavior. The window drew my attention immediately, large and easily accessible, with a view of the street 14 floors below. No balcony, just a sheer drop to the pavement. I unpacked, showered, and settled in to do some writing before bed. As the evening deepened outside my window, I noticed how quiet the room was. Unnaturally so, as if the walls absorbed sound rather than simply blocking it. Even the ubiquitous city noise was muted, creating an eerie pocket of silence around room 1419. The first hint that something was wrong came around midnight. I was typing away at my laptop when the bedside lamp flickered. Just once, a momentary dimming that I might have missed if I hadn't been looking directly at it. Then came the cold spot. I felt it as I walked past the bathroom door. A pocket of air so frigid it stung my skin. I checked the air conditioning vent, but it wasn't positioned anywhere near that spot. The cold seemed to have no source, yet it persisted, like an invisible block of ice suspended in the room. By 1 a.m., I decided to sleep. I turned off all the lights except the bathroom one, leaving the door cracked open, a habit from childhood I'd never entirely abandoned. As I drifted toward sleep, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound. Tap, 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 like fingernails against glass. I opened my eyes and looked toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but the tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. I got up, heart pounding, and slowly approached the window. The tapping stopped just as I reached the curtain. When I pulled it aside, there was nothing but the night sky and city lights far below. I returned to bed, convincing myself it was just the building settling or pipes knocking, normal hotel noises amplified by late-night silence. I was almost asleep when I heard the whisper, "Look at me." My eyes snapped open. The whisper had been clear, not imagined, not dreamed, but there was no one in the room. "Look at me," the voice came from the bathroom. Female, insistent. It carried a strange harmonic quality, as if multiple voices were speaking in perfect unison, layered just slightly out of sync. Against every instinct, I sat up. The bathroom door remained ajar, the light casting a thin slice of illumination across the carpet. "Look at me." I got out of bed, moving as if in a trance. Each step toward the bathroom felt like wading through invisible resistance. When I reached the door, I hesitated, then slowly pushed it open. The mirror above the sink reflected my terrified face, and nothing else. The bathroom was empty. But the mirror. Something about my reflection seemed wrong. As I stared, my features began to blur, the edges softening as if melting. Then, for just a moment, I thought I saw something crimson running down from my hairline. I stumbled backward, slamming the bathroom door shut. My heart hammered against my ribs as I retreated to the bed, pulling the covers up like a child hiding from monsters. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence that now felt hostile, expectant. Around 3 a.m. I heard movement by the window, a soft shuffling, like someone walking carefully across carpet. "It's better out there," the whisper came again. "Open the window." I squeezed my eyes shut, repeating to myself that it wasn't real, that I was overtired, imagining things. "Open the window. Jump. It's peaceful in the air." The voice was no longer just a whisper. It had substance, conviction. Worse, it was beginning to make sense. A strange calm settled over me. Yes, perhaps it would be peaceful, a moment of perfect freedom before I found myself standing at the window without consciously having gotten up. My hand reached for the latch. "That's right," the voice encouraged. "Open it, just one step, then freedom." My fingers touched the cold metal of the window latch, and then another voice, different, male, angry, hissed from the bathroom. Mine, not yours, mine to torment. The spell broke. I recoiled from the window, suddenly aware of what I'd been about to do. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and fled the room without taking anything else. In the lobby, a night manager looked up in surprise as I burst from the elevator. "Need a different room," I gasped. "Not on the 14th floor, not anywhere near 1419. He didn't ask questions, simply nodded and processed the room change. "Has this happened before?" I asked as he handed me a new keycard. "With that room?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Room 1419 has a history." The next morning I approached the day manager, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen everything the hotel had to offer. "I'd like to know about room 1419, I said. She studied me carefully. "You stayed there last night." It wasn't question. I heard voices, I admitted. One telling me to jump from the window, another one, angry, saying I belonged to it. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, resignation had replaced caution. "We don't officially acknowledge these incidents," she began, lowering her voice. "Management insists there's nothing wrong with the room, but those of us who've worked here long enough know better." She told me that in the hotel's long history, room 1419 had seen more self-harm incidents than any other. The earliest recorded was in 1931, a businessman who exited through the window. Since then, at least 7 others had done the same. "But that's not the strangest part," she continued. "In 1992, a guest in 1419 was discovered by housekeeping. He had carved hundreds of tiny cuts into his own body. None fatal, just painful. When questioned by authorities, he said a voice had been telling him to jump from the window, but another voice insisted he stay to suffer properly." My blood ran cold. "Exactly what I heard," she nodded grimly. "The room has been renovated multiple times. Blessed once, though management would deny that. Nothing helps. We try not to put guests in there, but during busy periods. Why keep the room available at all?" I asked. "Business," she shrugged. "And I think the current manager doesn't really believe the stories. He's new." After our conversation, I did some research of my own. The Cecil Hotel's dark history extended far beyond one room. Individuals with troubling histories had stayed there. Numerous tragedies had occurred within its walls. And most recently, the mysterious case of Elisa Lam, found in the hotel's water tank in 2013. But room 1419 was rarely mentioned in articles or forums discussing the Cecil's macabre reputation. It was as if its particular horror existed just below the surface of public awareness, a legend known only to those who experienced it firsthand. I found one online post from 2015, someone describing hearing voices near the window in room 1419, urging them to take the step. They described fighting the overwhelming compulsion before finally fleeing the room, just like I had. But the most chilling information came from a former housekeeper I tracked down. Maria had worked at the Cecil from 1988 to 2001. She initially refused to discuss room 1419, crossing herself when I mentioned it. Eventually, she revealed that housekeeping staff had a ritual before entering that room. They would never go in alone, and they would always announce their presence before opening the door. "To let them know we're not staying," she explained, "that we're just passing through." "Them?" I asked. "The voices," she whispered. "They fight over the guests. The soft one wants quick endings. The angry one wants to watch suffering." According to Maria, the voices weren't just random phenomena. They were intentional, targeted. They sought out vulnerable people, those already struggling with their mental balance or facing profound despair. The hotel's long history of tragedy had created a perfect environment for whatever dwelled in room 1419 to thrive. It feeds on desperation, she told me, and that hotel has seen more than its share. I left the Cecil Hotel that day and never returned. My research into room 1419 continues, though information remains scarce. What little I've found suggests the room has claimed at least one life every decade since the hotel opened. Some places absorb the tragedies they witness. The Cecil Hotel, with its long history of suffering, seems to have become a repository for darkness, a place where the boundary between the living and whatever lies beyond has worn dangerously thin. Room 1419, the whisper room as some staff secretly call it, represents the hotel's darkest corner. Perhaps the first person who ended their life there left an imprint, a psychic echo that influences vulnerable guests who occupy the space. Or perhaps something was already there, feeding on despair, collecting souls one by one. Most disturbing is the second voice I heard, the angry one claiming ownership of my suffering. This suggests not just a mindless replay of past tragedy, but something conscious, something that derives satisfaction from human pain. I still have nightmares about that window, about how close I came to opening it. In those dreams, I sometimes hear the voices arguing over me, one soft and seductive, the other harsh and possessive. 6 months after my experience, I received an email from someone who had found my online inquiries about room 1419. They claimed to be the child of a Cecil Hotel maintenance worker from the 1960s. Their father had discovered something during renovations. Beneath the wallpaper in room 1419 were hundreds of tiny scratches, names, dates, and one message repeated over and over: listen only to the voice that lets you leave. I've since learned that the Cecil Hotel's renovation plans include permanently sealing off several rooms, converting them into storage spaces rather than guest accommodations. Room 1419 is among them. Perhaps someone in management finally acknowledged what those of us who've experienced it already know. Some rooms should remain empty. Some voices should never be heard. And if you ever find yourself in an unfamiliar hotel room and hear a whisper suggesting the window might offer relief from your troubles, remember that voice might not be your own. Remember that something might be listening to your darkest thoughts, waiting to offer a solution that serves its purposes, not yours. Remember there may be more than one voice competing for your fate, and most importantly, remember to listen only to the voice that lets you leave. If this story left you checking over your shoulder, make sure to subscribe for more true accounts of those who faced the impossible and survived to tell about it. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain in a hotel room? Or felt an inexplicable urge that seemed to come from outside yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. And remember, if you ever hear a whisper telling you to do something that feels wrong, no matter how persuasive it sounds, walk away. Some voices aren't meant to be obeyed. There are legends that are born of lies, but there are those that are born of truth. The difference is that when they are real, you never sleep easy again.